My son David always had a flair for the dramatic. He'd inherited it from his father, along with a stubborn chin and the unfortunate belief that he was always the smartest person in any room. So, when he showed up on my doorstep one Tuesday afternoon with a collection of sleek white boxes, his face a mask of practiced solemnity, I knew I was in for a performance. The inciting incident, as he called it, had been laughably minor. I'd dropped a jar of pickles. That was it. The glass shattered, brine and dill-scented shards spread across the linoleum, and I'd spent 20 minutes meticulously cleaning it up. But I'd made the mistake of mentioning it during our weekly phone call, and David seized upon it like a vulture spotting a weakness. "Mom, I've been worried sick," he began, setting the boxes on my polished oak coffee table. The table had been a wedding gift from my late husband, Robert, and I winced as the sharp corners of the cardboard scraped against the wood. "You're here all alone. What if you'd fallen? What if you'd cut yourself badly? You didn't answer your phone for an hour." "I was cleaning, David," I said, my voice drier than I intended. It required a broom, a dustpan, and my full attention, not a team of paramedics. He waved away my logic with a flick of his wrist. "That's not the point. We need to be proactive. So I got you something, a little peace of mind for both of us." He tapped the largest box, which read Secure Home plus Smart Hub. It's a full smart home suite. I'll be able to check in, make sure the doors are locked, even adjust the thermostat for you from my phone. And, he added, pulling out a smaller device, it comes with these. He held up a small white camera, no bigger than a golf ball, mounted on a little stand. It looked innocuous, like a tiny, unblinking cyclops. "These are wellness cameras. I'll put one in the living room and one in the kitchen. They're not for spying," he said, a little too quickly. "They're just so I can see if you've had a fall, or if something's wrong. It's motion activated, so it only records if there's an incident." I looked at the camera, then back at my son. He was 38, a successful software project manager with a wife, 2 kids, and a mortgage that probably cost more per month than I'd paid for this entire house. But in his eyes, I saw myself reflected not as his mother, but as a problem to be managed, a variable in his life that needed to be controlled. He saw the woman who'd raised him, who'd run a small accounting firm for 25 years, as someone who couldn't handle a broken pickle jar. The condescension was a physical thing, hanging in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "David, I don't know," I started. "Mom, please, just let me do this for you." "For me," he insisted, his voice softening into that manipulative tone he'd perfected as a teenager. "It'll help me sleep at night." What could I say? He was already unboxing everything, pulling out wires and instruction manuals with the focused energy of a man solving a puzzle he'd set for himself. I watched him work, a strange coldness creeping into my chest. He explained the system to me in the slow, simple terms one might use for a toddler. He showed me the tablet he was leaving behind, preloaded with the Secure Home Plus app. "See, Mom? Just one big button to press if you need help. I'll get an alert right on my phone." He didn't show me any of the other settings. He probably assumed I wouldn't know where to look or what to do if I found them. He saw a frail, technologically illiterate old woman. And right then, I decided that was exactly what I wanted him to see. I smiled, a gentle, slightly vacant smile. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear. Thank you." He beamed, convinced of his own magnanimity. The trap wasn't his. It was mine, and he had just willingly built its walls. For the first week, I did my best to ignore them. The 2 little white orbs, one perched on the mantelpiece, its gaze sweeping across the living room, the other tucked onto a high shelf in the kitchen, observing my every move from the stove to the sink. David had called every single day, his voice brimming with false cheer. "Just checking in, Mom? Saw you were watching Jeopardy earlier. Great category on 19th century poets, huh?" Or, "Noticed you haven't moved from your armchair in a while? Everything okay?" Each call was a fresh violation, a reminder that my home was no longer my own. The quiet solitude I cherished had been replaced by a constant, low-grade hum of being watched. My privacy had been stolen and replaced with a wellness subscription. The anger began as a slow burn. I'm not a fool. I ran my own business for a quarter of a century, handling payroll and taxes for 24 local companies. I balanced books that would make most people's eyes cross. Before I retired, I was using accounting software more complex than anything David had installed. His assumption of my incompetence was the deepest insult of all. He hadn't just installed cameras, he'd installed a monument to his low opinion of me. The turning point came on a Thursday morning. I was watering my African violets on the windowsill, humming to myself. As I leaned over, the morning light hit the decorative smoke detector on the ceiling, one of the new ones David had also installed as part of the safety package, at just the right angle. For a split second, I saw a flash, a tiny dark circle of glass glinting back at me. It was a lens. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the two obvious cameras. He had put a hidden one in the ceiling. How many more were there? In my bedroom? The bathroom? A wave of nausea and fury washed over me. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. This was a total boundaryless intrusion. That evening, I played the part. I sat in my armchair knitting a hideous, lumpy scarf, occasionally sighing dramatically for the camera's benefit. I moved slowly, as if my joints ached, but after I turned off the lights and went to my bedroom, where I meticulously checked every outlet, every fixture, and thankfully found nothing, I didn't go to sleep. I crept back into the living room in the dark, my old laptop in hand. I sat on the floor, out of the camera's line of sight, and used my phone as a hotspot. The first thing I did was search for the Secure Home Plus's system. It took me less than an hour to find the user forums and the default administrator passwords. David, in his infinite arrogance, hadn't even bothered to change it from admin 1234. I logged into the system through my web browser, and there it was, my entire life laid out in a grid of video feeds. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and a fourth, wider angle view from the smoke detector. I could see the live feeds, I could see the cloud-based recordings, neatly filed by date and time, and I could see the access logs. David, his wife Susan, logging in multiple times a day, watching me. I scrolled through the recordings, my heart pounding with a cold, hard rage. There I was struggling to open a jar. There I was talking to my cat. There I was, just sitting, reading, living, all of it recorded and reviewed like I was a specimen in a lab. He hadn't just underestimated my intelligence, he had fundamentally misjudged my character. He thought I was a passive old woman who would simply accept her cage. He was about to find out how wrong he was. For the next few days, I became the world's most dedicated method actor. My role, the sweet, slightly dotty mother David believed me to be. I'd struggle to work the television remote, calling him in a fluster so he could watch me fumble on his phone and talk me through it. I'd leave a pot of water on the stove until it almost boiled dry, only to remember it at the last second with a theatrical gasp, knowing he was likely seconds away from calling the fire department. I performed my frailty for his unblinking electronic eyes, and he bought every second of it. His calls became even more frequent, dripping with a syrupy, patronizing concern that made my teeth ache. "Mom, you really need to be more careful," he'd say. "I saw you almost had a little accident in the kitchen." "Oh dear me, I'm just so forgetful these days," I'd reply, my voice trembling with manufactured weakness. "Thank goodness you're looking out for me, David." Meanwhile, my nights were spent in quiet, furious study. Huddled on the floor of my bedroom, the laptop screen casting a pale glow on my face, I became an expert on the Secure Home Plus system. I learned its vulnerabilities. I learned that while I couldn't easily delete the cloud recordings without a trace, I could manipulate the live feed data. More importantly, I learned how to see exactly who was watching and when. David was obsessive, logging in every morning before work, at lunch, and multiple times throughout the evening. Susan was less frequent, a casual observer in my slow-motion downfall. My plan began to form, not as a single lightning bolt of inspiration, but as a slow, meticulous construction, built brick by angry brick. Revenge couldn't just be about exposing him. That was too simple. It had to be a masterpiece of irony. I had to use the very tools of my imprisonment to spring a trap he would never see coming. I needed to use his underestimation of me as the bait. He saw me as a vulnerable old woman, ripe for being taken advantage of. Fine. I would give him a scenario so terrifying, so urgent, that his savior complex and his greed would override any shred of common sense. The centerpiece of my plan was my late husband's coin collection. Robert had been an avid numismatist, and his collection of American silver eagles was his pride and joy. It was valuable, but not astronomically so, maybe $10,000 on a good day. But David had always believed it was a hidden fortune, a treasure trove waiting for him. He'd ask about it constantly after Robert passed, thinly veiling his avarice with comments like, "You should get that appraised, Mom, just for insurance purposes." So the coin collection would be the lure. I needed a villain, a plausible threat to my safety and my assets. The stage was being set. I started small. I took the heavy steel lockbox containing the coins out of my closet and placed it on the dining room table, directly in the line of sight of the hallway camera. I'd open it, sigh wistfully, and polish a few of the silver dollars, making sure the light glinted off them. I was no longer just an actress. I was a director, blocking scenes for an audience of one, and my leading man had no idea he was about to be cast as the fool. The performance began on a Monday. After meticulously checking the Secure Home Plus admin panel to ensure David was logged in on his lunch break, I walked over to the telephone. I dialed the number for my friend Helen, a retired drama teacher, and the only person I'd trusted with the truth. As arranged, she didn't answer. It went to voicemail, which was perfect. It allowed for a one-sided conversation with no risk of an errant line of dialogue from her end. I took a deep, shaky breath and began. "Oh, Helen, it's Carol. Pick up, pick up. Well, listen, I just had the most interesting visitor." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for the benefit of the hidden microphone. "You know, I've been thinking about getting Robert's coins appraised. Well, I found a specialist online, a young man named Mr. Finch, very charming. He just left." I walked into the living room, directly in front of the mantelpiece camera, and let my voice fill with a conspiratorial whisper. "Helen, you're not going to believe it. He said the collection, some of those silver eagles are apparently extremely rare minting errors. He thinks the whole lot could be worth, well, he threw out a number that just made my head spin. Over $50,000. I knew David's ears would be burning. 50,000 was a magic number, enough to pay off a car or take a lavish vacation. It was the perfect hook. He was very professional, I continued, pacing back and forth. But he was intense. He wants to buy it, all of it. He said he's a private collector, and he'd pay in cash to avoid auction fees and taxes. Can you imagine? All that cash, right here in the house. I let that idea settle. I knew David's mind. He'd be picturing a briefcase full of money, but he'd also be picturing a stranger with knowledge of a vulnerable old woman sitting on a small fortune. His protective instincts and his greed would be at war, creating the perfect cocktail of anxiety. "He's coming back, Helen, on Thursday night, around 8 o'clock. He said he'd bring the full amount then, and we could do the deal. I don't know. I have a funny feeling about it. He was a little too smooth, you know." I let my voice trail off, injecting a note of manufactured fear. "Maybe I should just call it off. It feels like a lot to handle on my own. Anyway, call me back when you get this." I hung up the phone. The house was silent again, but I could feel the vibrations of my words traveling through the wires, across the internet, and materializing on a screen in David's office. I had planted the seed. I'd given him the who, the what, the where, and the when. I'd created a villain, a treasure, and a damsel in distress. For the next 3 days, I would water that seed with carefully curated snippets of anxiety. I'd talk to my cat. "Oh, Mittens, I'm so nervous about Thursday." I'd pull out the lockbox and stare at it, wringing my hands. I was building the pressure in David's mind, tightening the spring on the trap until the slightest touch would set it off. He thought he was watching a prelude to a crime. He had no idea he was the main character in a play I was writing just for him. Wednesday, the day before the grand finale, was all about escalation. I needed to transform David's simmering anxiety into a full-blown panic to ensure he would act rashly and decisively. My morning check of the access logs showed he was a nervous wreck. He'd logged in 17 times before noon. He was hooked. My next performance was another phone call, this time a real one with Helen, who was now fully briefed and enjoying her supporting role immensely. I made the call from the kitchen, right under the camera on the shelf. Helen, thank you for calling back, I said, my voice tight with stress. I'm glad I got a hold of you. It's about that coin dealer, Mr. Finch. Oh yes, the charming Mr. Finch, Helen said, her voice dripping with theatrical concern. Is everything all right, Carol? You sounded so worried. Well, that's the thing. He just called me again. He's pushy. He insisted on confirming for tomorrow night, 8 o'clock sharp. He said he's already arranged the cash and that it's a now or never deal. I lowered my voice, moving closer to the phone, as if sharing a dark secret. And this is the part that really bothers me. He asked if my son still visited often. How would he know I have a son? I never mentioned David. It was creepy, Helen. It felt like he'd been watching my house. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. I was feeding David's paranoia, using his own surveillance against him. On his end, he would hear this and assume the criminal had been casing the joint, confirming that the sweet, vulnerable old lady would be alone. Carol, that's not right, Helen exclaimed, hitting her cue perfectly. A legitimate dealer would never operate that way. This sounds dangerous. You need to call the police, or at least call David. No, I said, a little too loudly. I don't want to bother David. He worries so much, and he's so busy with work. And what would I tell the police? That a man wants to give me $50,000? They'd laugh at me. I'll be fine. I'll just be firm with him. I'm a grown woman. I can handle it. I hung up the phone, my heart beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. That was the masterstroke. By explicitly stating I wouldn't call David, I made it certain that he would feel he was the only one who could intervene. I had isolated myself, refused help, and dismissed the danger. To a man like my son, that was an irresistible call to action. He wouldn't call the police himself. That would risk them getting to the cash first or complicating his inheritance. No, he would see himself as the hero, swooping in to save his clueless mother from the clutches of a con man. That evening, I did one final check on the system. The logs showed David had logged out of his work network and logged back in from his home IP address an hour early. He was home, stewing. He was probably pacing his perfectly manicured lawn, planning his heroic rescue. I imagined him telling Susan he had to handle something for my mom, his voice full of self-importance. The trap wasn't just set. The animal was sniffing at the bait, convinced it was his for the taking. All I had to do now was wait for the snap. Thursday arrived, gray and overcast, the sky a perfect reflection of my cold, methodical mood. I spent the day in quiet preparation, a general getting her troops in order before a decisive battle. My preparations, however, involved dusting and baking. I made a batch of lemon poppy seed muffins, the familiar scent filling the house and calming my nerves. If the police were going to be visiting, the least I could do was offer them a snack. At 6 o'clock, exactly 2 hours before the fictional Mr. Finch was due to arrive, I made the most important call of the entire affair. I dialed the non-emergency number for the local police department. I didn't want to dial 911. There was no immediate, life-threatening emergency, and I needed to be calm and credible. A friendly-sounding dispatcher named Maria answered. Rockwood Police Department. Dispatcher Maria speaking. This is a non-emergency line. How can I help you? Good evening, Maria, I said, my voice steady and clear. My name is Carol Peterson. I live at 412 Oak Street. I need to report a situation that is developing at my home, but I want to be very clear. I am not in any danger. I could hear the gentle clacking of a keyboard on her end. Okay, Miss Peterson, go ahead. My son recently installed a smart home security system in my house, including several cameras. I have since discovered that he installed them in part to monitor my activities without my full knowledge or consent. He believes I am mentally and physically frail, which I am not. I see, Maria said, her tone professional but laced with interest. Over the last few days, I continued, I have used his own cameras to stage a scenario. I have led him to believe that I am about to be the victim of a scam or a robbery tonight at 8 o'clock, involving a large sum of cash for a coin collection. There was a brief pause on the line. You've staged a scenario, ma'am? Yes, I have reason to believe that my son, in an attempt to save me and likely secure what he believes to be a large sum of cash, will use the key he has to my house to enter without my permission around that time. He will be trespassing. He believes he is walking in on a crime in progress, but the only crime that will be committed tonight is his illegal entry into my home. I am not in danger from a fictional conman, but I do feel harassed by my son's surveillance, and I want his trespassing handled by law enforcement. I would like to request that officers be present to witness and intervene when he enters my home. I heard Maria cover the phone, a muffled conversation with a supervisor in the background. After a moment, she was back. Miss Peterson, this is a highly unusual request, but I've spoken with my sergeant. We can have a patrol car in your area. Can you describe your son for us? I gave them David's description, his car, and his license plate number. I assured them again that there was no real threat, no Mr. Finch, no cash. The only players were me and my son. Maria told me 2 officers would park down the street and wait for my signal. A simple text message to a number she provided, when I was sure David was on his way. After the call, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The table was set. The police were briefed, my muffins were cooling on the rack. I sat in my armchair, picked up my book, and waited. The cameras on the mantelpiece and in the hall recorded a placid, ordinary scene. An old woman, reading quietly in her living room, waiting. At 7:45 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. David. Mom, are you okay? I'm worried about this guy. Please answer. I ignored it. A minute later, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. I checked the Secure Home Plus app on my tablet. The access log showed David was actively watching the living room feed. He saw me sitting there, seemingly oblivious. He saw the time ticking closer to 8 o'clock. He saw my phone ringing, unanswered. At 7:55 p.m., his panic boiled over. He called again and again. I watched the screen of my phone light up, then go dark. The trap was perfectly calibrated. My unresponsiveness was the final confirmation he needed that something was terribly wrong, or about to be. With my thumb, I sent the pre-written text to the dispatcher's number. He is on his way. I calmly placed the tablet on the end table next to me, the screen angled perfectly so that the front door was visible in its reflection. It was my own little camera, my own little record of the truth. I heard the faint sound of a car pulling up quickly, the engine cutting out. A moment later, heavy, frantic footsteps on my porch. Then, the sound of a key fumbling in the lock. The front door burst open. "Mom!" David yelled, his eyes wild, his face flushed. He was dressed in jeans and a dark hoodie, trying to look imposing. "Mom, are you okay? Where is he? Did you let him in?" He stormed into the living room, his gaze darting around, looking for the imaginary Mr. Finch, for the briefcase of cash, for the danger he was so sure he'd find. And that's when I stood up. "He's right here," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and strength he hadn't heard in years. As if on cue, 2 uniformed police officers stepped out from the shadows of my dining room, where they'd been waiting silently for the past 10 minutes. A tall, serious-looking officer held up a hand. "Sir, stay right where you are." David froze. His head snapped from me to the officers and back again. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly pale confusion. "What? What is this? Mom? I was trying to help. There's a man coming here to rob you." "No, David," I said, picking up the tablet. I turned it so he could see the screen. On it was the live feed from the hallway camera, showing his own panicked face as he illegally entered my home. "There is no Mr. Finch. There is no $50,000. There is only you, spying on me, for weeks." "That's not true," he stammered, his bravado crumbling into sputtering denial. "The cameras are for your safety." The second officer, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. "Sir, we received a call from your mother. She informed us that you have her under surveillance, and that you would likely be trespassing this evening under false pretenses. Is this your key?" she asked, pointing to the key still in the inside of the door lock. She gave it to me for emergencies," David sputtered. "And did she declare this an emergency?" the officer pressed. "Or did you decide that for her, based on information you gathered from surveillance equipment she didn't consent to?" David opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, the rage and confusion warring with the sudden humiliating understanding that he had been played. He hadn't been the hero of this story. He was the villain, caught red-handed, not by a cunning criminal, but by the clueless old lady he had so profoundly disrespected. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of the technology he had used to condemn himself. The aftermath was less dramatic than the confrontation, but far more satisfying. David wasn't hauled away in handcuffs, much to my secret disappointment, but he was formally cited for criminal trespassing. The officers were incredibly professional. They took my full statement, documenting the surveillance and the psychological distress it had caused. They gave David a stern lecture on elder abuse, privacy laws, and the sheer stupidity of his actions. They escorted him from my property with the explicit warning that if he set foot on it again without my express invitation, he would be arrested immediately. I had them wait while I changed the code on the smart lock he had installed and used their presence to demand he hand over the physical key. He did so, his hand trembling with fury and shame. The next day I had a locksmith come and change every lock on the house. Then I hired a local tech kid, a clever teenager from down the street, to do a full sweep. He found the two obvious cameras, the one in the smoke detector, and a fourth one I'd missed, tucked behind the refrigerator and aimed at the back door. The kid disabled and removed every single piece of David's gift. As he dropped the last little white cyclops into a cardboard box, a feeling of lightness washed over me, a physical sense of a weight being lifted. My home was mine again. The silence was no longer a vessel for suspicion, but a comfortable blanket of peace. I filed for a restraining order the following week. My son, the man who wanted to proactively manage my life, was now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of it. He tried to call, sending a barrage of texts that swung wildly from furious accusations to pathetic apologies. I blocked his number. His wife, Susan, sent a long, rambling email about how it was all a terrible misunderstanding. I replied with a single sentence. The only misunderstanding was your husband's belief that my age had erased my intelligence. It's been 3 months. Now, the silence from their end is total. My victory wasn't loud or explosive, it was quiet, digital, and absolute. I didn't just defeat my son, I used his own arrogance, his own technology, his own prejudice against him. He built a digital prison for me, believing I was too old and frail to even see the bars. But he forgot who taught him how to play chess. He forgot that I see the whole board, not just the next move. My life is my own. I read my books, I tend my garden, and I bake my muffins in the quiet, unobserved solitude of a home that is finally, unequivocally, just for me. And every now and then, I look at the empty spot on the mantelpiece and I smile. He thought he was watching me, but in the end, the only one who got trapped was the spy himself,